Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Night Tales. Before we dive in, please show your support, give this video a like, and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so that you don't miss future videos. So let's get started. The first story. My wife hasn't slept since we moved into our dream apartment. Last night, I finally figured out why. It was late July when my wife Ada and I moved into our new apartment on Maple Street. The road was a welcome addition to a newly built neighborhood, the apartments of which were all modern and highly sought after. We were planning to start a family, and the district seemed like the perfect place to do it. The leaflets depicted a child-friendly environment, and the billboards on the highway showed photographs of laughing couples and barbecue get-togethers. Granted, the apartments on Maple Street were far more expensive than those in any other part of the city. I noticed the asking price while Ada was scrolling through the photos of the ad, and by the time she was done explaining the intricacies of the bathroom, my underarms were soaked in a cold sweat. "Baby," I began, playing for time, "don't you think we ought to look at something, a bit more affordable? How about someplace nearer the station? I mean, the apartments there aren't as new, but they have some pretty solid options." But Ada stuck out her bottom lip and whimpered, "But Alex, I really don't want a second-hand apartment. Think of our baby. We need to have the best." I sighed, fully aware that I was neither going to change her mind, nor did I have much of a say in the matter. We didn't have a baby yet. In fact, Ada wasn't even pregnant, but she sure had a very pronounced idea of what kind of family dynamic she wanted us to have. I knew she'd taken one look at the photos of the clean-cut white stone playgrounds and the surrounding benches with clay flower pots, and her mind was made up. There was no point in arguing or trying to get her to see otherwise. So, we bought it. The day the apartment complex finally opened for its new residents, the entire courtyard was bustling with life. Large groups of movers gathered in the residential plaza, laden with dozens of suitcases and plastic bags. Their kids tugged behind them, clamoring for a drink, an ice cream, or the bathroom, and pets were causing a ruckus from inside their kennels. The sight was truly chaotic, but Ada seemed delighted. "It's just like the ads," she cried, clasping her hands to her chest and making her way through the chattering crowd. I followed closely behind, struggling under the weight of our belongings. Our apartment was on the 6th floor. It was bright and spacious, with large paned windows stemming from the floor all the way up to the ceiling. We had to pay extra to get it furnished, but Ada was adamant about having everything ready before the big day. "I don't want to sleep on the floor for the first 2 months," she wailed, jabbing at the furniture catalog. "And what about the leather couch? Can we get that one too?" I told her we could. After all, what are $2,000 in comparison to a $500,000 purchase? I'd already come to terms with the fact that I'd be paying off the mortgage until I drew my final breath. Still, I didn't mind too much at the time. We were young newlyweds, and the apartment was roomy, modern, with a beautiful view. I told myself it was an investment. Things took a turn for the worse only a couple of nights into our new life. Ada woke me up in tears in the early hours to tell me she'd had the most bizarre dream. "I dreamt I was falling," she whispered, clutching my arm. "It was so realistic, Alex, I even felt it when I hit the ground." She burst into tears and refused to go back to sleep, emphasizing how vivid the dream was and how she could still feel the implications of the fall, despite being awake. She seemed really shaken up, so I got up to calm her down and make breakfast. "It was only a bad dream," I kept repeating. She felt better after a long cuddle and some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but the following night was no different. "Alex," I woke up to Ada sitting on the ground, knuckling her eyes and hissing at me. "I had the same dream." I brushed away the covers and lifted her back onto the mattress. "Are you all right? What are you doing on the floor?" "I must have," she sobbed. "I must have fallen out of bed." Once again, Ada was wide awake at 3 in the morning, so I put on a DVD and wrapped her in my arms like a cocoon, hoping sleep would eventually find her. I couldn't help feeling like I was missing out on my own rest though, since whenever I tried to close my eyes, Ada shook me and snapped her fingers. "Please don't leave me," she wailed, "I'm scared." I did my best to fight against my natural instincts. I fought long and hard, sometimes for several hours at a time, only paying the price after I got to work. With droopy eyelids and a brain fried from watching reruns of 90s sitcoms at 3 a.m., I had no chance of getting anything productive done during the day. The cycle continued for several nights until one evening I caught Ada coming out of the bathroom. She had just taken a shower and was tiptoeing into the walk-in closet, a towel draped loosely around her upper body. Our eyes met and I smiled, but she didn't reciprocate, instead flinching and hastening her step. That's when my gaze slid down to her legs. "What is that?" I asked, alarmed, grabbing hold of her forearm and stopping her in her tracks. "Ada, what happened?" Her thighs and calves were peppered with bruises, some very large and blue, others smaller and brown. In several places, the bruising was so bad I couldn't even see her beautiful skin. She saw me looking and tried to cover them up with the hem of the towel, but I had already seen enough. She stuttered, "It's nothing, Alex, don't look at me." She tried to brush past me, but I stopped her. "What do you mean it's nothing? Look at you. You're hurt. Tell me what happened. Who did this to you?" She sniveled and clutched the towel tighter. I must have fallen out of bed one too many times." I was about to protest. I was about to suggest she see a doctor for her nightmares, when the room was abruptly enveloped in blue-red flashing lights. We jumped to the bedroom window and stared down at the street. An ambulance was pulling in slowly through a crowd of people gathered beside the main entrance. Despite the building being brand new, the elevator didn't seem to be working. Either that, or it simply wasn't ready yet. I'd have considered this nothing but a minor inconvenience, if it wasn't for the fact that by the time I descended all the flights of stairs, I was rather sweaty and out of breath. "What happened?" I asked one of the passers-by, who was eagerly spectating the commotion. "Oh," he shook his head solemnly, "a man jumped from the 8th floor. Must have been a suicide. He was young too, couldn't have been over 35. Fell on top of that bench over there." I gawked at him, but he did not seem interested in making further conversation. We hadn't had the chance to get to know our neighbors, but the young man's death shook me to my core. I looked away as two paramedics with a stretcher made their way through the crowd. I stood there for a while, pondering the questions of life and death, even as the spectators scattered and returned to their homes. "Come along, dear, nothing to see here," an elderly woman shook her head at me. "Go on home." I returned to my own apartment, desperately trying to hold back tears. Ada was waiting for me in the doorway and didn't hesitate to ask questions. "Is it the grandmother from the apartment below us? Has she come down with something? I met her the other day when I was going to the supermarket." "Oh, Alex, she's such a sweet lady. I couldn't bear if anything happened to her." I wasn't sure whether telling Ada about the evening's events was a good idea. She was already burdened enough by her relentless nightmares and hadn't been able to sleep properly since we'd moved in. I didn't want to risk making matters worse, so I brushed it off and simply told her I hadn't been able to find out. "Well, did you ask anyone?" "Yeah, I asked around," I said, taking my shoes off and making my way into the kitchen. "No one was sure. They just came to see the ambulance." I knew all too well how ridiculous my answer must have sounded, but honestly, it beat facing yet another one of Ada's nightmares. Let's just go to bed, darling," I said, sweeping her up into my arms and carrying her to our bedroom. It's probably nothing. Don't you worry about it." She conceded, allowing me to help her out of her clothes and tuck her in. I shut the bedroom blinds as innocuously as I could, something I never did, but Ada didn't seem to notice. "Do you want to watch a movie to help you sleep?" I asked, and she nodded. Even from the other side of the room, I could see how tired she looked. Her eyelids were half shut, and I knew she wouldn't last through the opening credits. I was right. As soon as the title of the film appeared in big bold letters across the screen, Ada was out of it. I watched her for a couple of minutes, mentally accounting for the events I'd witnessed that day. I remembered her legs, beaten, covered in bruises. I couldn't bear the thought of it. Gently, I lifted the covers and stared at them, my own skin prickling. How had this happened? To my knowledge, Ada had only fallen out of bed 3 times, and neither one of those falls could have possibly resulted in something so vile. Was she hurting herself? I went to sleep that night with a heavy conscience. Everything seemed wrong. Our forever home, as Ada kept calling it, despite me telling her that the expression wasn't suitable, seemed to be getting more and more temporary by the day, and I couldn't help feeling like we had been better off in the small, 1-bedroom apartment I had sold. I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately felt for my wife, but she wasn't there. The room was pitch black, so I felt the floor on both sides of the bed, thinking that perhaps she had fallen out again, but my search yielded no results. "Ada," I called, making my way into the hallway, "baby." But the apartment was as silent as a tomb. "Ada," I tried again, my voice hoarse, "where are you?" Then, I heard it. A faint thudding sound coming from the kitchen. I couldn't tell what it was, but it sounded like a grandfather clock that had gone haywire. Rhythmic, low vibrations reverberated throughout the apartment, stopping and then starting up again. Ada. She didn't even flinch when the kitchen lights came on. She was standing with her back to me in front of the counter, chopping something on one of the wooden cutting boards. "Ada," I stood in the doorway, my stomach churning, "what are you doing?" No answer. The only sound was that of the knife landing in short bursts on the cutting board. I approached her, pulled her hair out of her face and peeked over her shoulder. I wish I hadn't. The cutting board was covered in blood. The fingers of her left hand were spread, and the knife aimed for the spaces in between. Her hand was covered in scratches and cuts, bubbles of pink flesh peeking through the incisions. Her pinky finger lay turned into mush in the corner of the cutting board, as blood from the wound trickled onto the white kitchen tiles. "Ada," I yelled, snatching the crimson knife out of her hands and tossing it to the other side of the room. "What the?" Before I could finish that thought, Ada collapsed onto the floor, gasping on impact. "Alex," she sounded hysterical, "where am I? What's going on?" I was about to give her a piece of my mind when she noticed her left hand. She stared at it in shock, her face turning a myriad of different shades. All that remained of her pinky was no more than a chunk of ground meat, dangling limply from the rest of her hand. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said firmly. "I should call an ambulance." "No, no ambulance, please," Ada whispered, "we can't afford it." "Look, I can walk." She scrambled to her feet and wobbled across the kitchen in a shaky line, before falling to her knees. We were lucky the emergency room wasn't too busy that night. We only spent about 20 minutes waiting before the doctor called us in. He stitched up some of Ada's most dire cuts but couldn't save her pinky. "How did this happen?" he asked, staring at my wife over the top of his spectacles. But Ada was out of it. She was lying on the bed with her eyes shut, and only whimpering ever so slightly every few minutes. "A knife," I murmured, "it was an accident." The doctor shook his head. "A knife makes stab wounds, but your wife's finger, well, it's been pulverized." I chewed my inner lip. "I don't know what to tell you, Doc. I wasn't there when it happened. I walked in when it was already in its current state. And you're telling me your wife has no recollection of the events?" "No," she seemed disoriented, to say the least. As if she had just woken up. "She's been having these vivid nightmares every night, and her legs are all bruised up too, and..." The doctor raised his index finger. "I have reason to suspect your wife might be suffering from somnambulism. Now, I can't be sure until we run some tests, but..." "What's that?" I interrupted. "Well," he continued patiently, "have you considered that your wife is, perhaps, sleepwalking?" I gawked at him, and no. Wouldn't I have noticed if she did? He nodded towards Ada. your wife is chronically exhausted. You might want to keep an eye on her until you can make an appointment with your family doctor." So, I did. It was very difficult for Ada to come to terms with her new diagnosis. She tossed and turned every night before going to sleep, and often resorted to slipping out of bed quietly and keeping herself occupied in the living room. "Ada, baby, you can't just not sleep. Remember, the doctor said the more sleep-deprived you are, the worse it'll get." "I'm scared, Alex," she'd tell me. "What if I decide to chop my entire hand off, or something? What if I hurt you? One of us has to stay awake." So, I stayed awake as long as I could manage. I didn't even go to bed anymore. I sat in the living room with a bottle of scotch and a stack of DVDs, guarding my wife against her own nightmares. My job took the back seat and I started coming in disheveled and sleep-deprived. My boss noticed, of course. He didn't pry and only asked me to take a couple of days off to rest. "I can't do this anymore," I told Ada last night. "Honey, I'm going to lose my job. Something has got to give." She stared at me, her blue eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I just want everything to be okay again." I promised her it would, and before she could protest, added, "Hey, you know what?" She joined me at the kitchen counter and examined the rope, silently wrapping it around her wrist and entwining it through her fingers. "Feels a bit naughty," she giggled, but then nodded. "Let's do it." She skipped into the bedroom and sprawled out on the bed, her arms and legs spread as wide as she could manage. I laughed and shook my head. "I don't think that's necessary, honey, this isn't an exorcism." "Oh," her face fell. "Well, maybe it should be." Okay, how do you want me, then?" "Well," I began, pulling her wrists together and wrapping the rope around them. "My main concern is to make sure you're comfortable, so tell me if it's too tight. And you not cutting off any more body parts is only a bonus." When her hands were tied, I moved down to her ankles. "I'm going to attach one of the rope ends to the bedpost. This way, even if you sleepwalk, you'll need to work really hard to free yourself, waking me up in the process." Hopefully, her laugh was shaky. "You have about 2 weeks of sleep to catch up on. I'll be surprised if you wake up at all." I knew she was only trying to be funny, but her joke left a bitter taste in my mouth. Ever since we'd moved into Maple Street, everything seemed to be going downhill, fast. "Okay, are you comfortable?" I asked, getting up from the bed and looking over the contraption I had made of my wife. She nodded, and I tucked her in, giving her a peck on her forehead. Then, I trudged through each room, turning off the lights and praying that at least once, I'd be able to sleep through the night. When I woke up it was still dark. I checked my phone, which read 3:23 a.m. My first thought was that my body had become accustomed to sleep deprivation and instinctively knew when to wake up to check on Ada. I angled my phone screen towards her side of the bed, expecting to see her sleeping peacefully by my side. But she was gone. There were no signs she'd ever been there in the first place. The rope was missing, and her side of the bed was uncreased, as if she'd never gone to sleep in the first place. "Oh, FCK, I whispered, getting out of bed and flipping on the lights. I checked each side of the bed, I even checked under it. I went through each room in the apartment, flipping on all the switches and calling her name to no avail. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, hell, I even cracked the front door open to see if she was there, despite locking it every evening myself. "Ada," I called desperately, "please answer me." My words were met with a ringing silence. I wanted to fall to my knees and weep. Where was she? She couldn't have just disappeared into thin air. Every window and door had been locked. I slipped my feet into my shoes and grabbed my coat, fully intending to go out looking for her all the same, when a voice intercepted my thoughts. "Alex," she called, "I'm down here." I stood still, a chill crawling up my spine. "Down where?" "We lived on the 6th floor." "Down here," she giggled. "Open the window." I rushed to the window, pried it open, and stuck my head out. "Where?" "You're not looking," she sounded dismayed. "Look down." I edged farther up the windowsill, sticking my head out the window, yet I could see no sign of my wife. "Closer," she demanded. "You're not looking." Desperately clutching the windowpane, I stuck my upper body farther out into the night. My knees were buckling as I kneeled on the edge of the windowsill, and sweat was dripping down the small of my back. I scanned the road below, but there was no sign of her. There was no sign of anyone. "Alex!" A sudden high-pitched shriek nearly made me topple over. Ada was lying on her side of the bed, still tied up, screaming bloody murder. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" My palms felt slippery against the windowpane and my heart was practically leaping out of my throat. I stared at her, unsure of what to say or do. My head was spinning and my balance wavering. "Alex, get down from there right now," she squirmed, trying to free herself from her rope prison. "What are you doing?" I stammered. "I don't. I swear to God, either you get down right now, or I will." She didn't finish her sentence, and instead burst into tears. I obeyed, sliding down from the windowsill and crumpling onto the floor. What had just happened? Had I almost taken my own life? Had I almost left my wife tied up and incapacitated in our own bed? "Alex," Ada whispered, "what happened?" I couldn't answer her. I didn't know what to say. How could I have possibly explained this to her? How could I have possibly told her that she had been calling me from outside the window? Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. A gust of wind blew a leaf inside the room, and I scrambled to my feet to shut the window. The night air was crisp and refreshing on my flushed skin. I stared at the dark neighborhood. In the dead of night, it looked empty and derelict. The only sound was that of the trees whispering and a shriek of sirens in the distance. Suddenly, a light came on in the adjacent building. In a sea of black, the little square of light seemed almost inviting. I watched as a woman ran up to the window and opened it. She stood there motionless for a few seconds, staring into nothingness. Then, she leaned down, farther and farther, looking down for some invisible blade of grass, a hidden entity, a voice. I watched her until I couldn't watch anymore, shutting the window a second before the reverberating splat. The second story. Everything felt wrong after the dream I had 4 years ago. I had an odd dream a few years ago, and I'm constantly reminded of it every day of my life. I was somewhere in Europe, walking around with unfamiliar faces. A few teenagers were with me, but one boy stood out. I didn't know who he was, but he just felt so familiar. It was like I've known him forever. One thing led to another, and suddenly I was running, and I just felt so weightless, free, and happy. I was running towards the boy, and the next thing I knew we were in the car that was beside him a few moments ago. The car was speeding so fast, and the thing is, there was nothing outside. There were no trees, cars, or buildings. The car was moving in such ridiculous speed, and all I could see was a mixture of colorful lights and darkness. The boy was suddenly shouting and crying, and I felt that something was off. I recall him saying I was going to end up somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, that there was some sort of mistake, and when I heard him saying that I remember feeling really scared. Then I woke up. And I felt as if something was missing, and that something has changed, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Ever since I had that dream, weird and bad things started happening in my life. The guy who's never paid an ounce of attention to me in school, and who's previously been a jerk, started to magically have feelings for me out of nowhere. Which, by the way, ended up giving me additional trauma. My best friend who I was with most of the time disappeared, not in a literal sense, but it was like we were never friends to begin with. She wasn't mean or anything BTW, but every time I'd approach her she'd give me a strange and puzzled look as if we've never talked before. The strangest part was a few kids from my class started hanging out with me, and would occasionally tell stories I was included in, but I had no memory of. One time I told them that I couldn't remember what happened, and maybe they've mistaken me for someone else. They all looked at me, and for a second, I got scared. I don't know what got me frightened in the first place, but I just had that feeling, you know. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's the feeling you get when you know someone's watching you from a distance. They just brushed it off soon enough, and said that I've always just had bad memory, which honestly scared me ever more, because I really don't forget things. Tons of family problems started piling up, and it really just went downhill from there. After 4 years, I'm honestly now used to the never-ending problems and disappointment that's constantly being thrown at me, but I just can't stop wondering, because it really feels like something huge has been taken away from me, and I can never get it back. The third story. Man in the window. This probably isn't nearly as scary as a lot of the stories on this sub, but it is definitely one of the creepier things I've experienced. This happened some years ago. I was 20, I think. I was going on a road trip of a sort with a really good friend of mine and his family. Our destination was a concert in a country next to ours, but we would be stopping at night to sleep in the camper we drove in. We hadn't crossed the border yet when we stopped at the first campsite for the night. Now it seemed like a pretty family-friendly and safe place, so none of us had our guards up or anything. That night at about 11 p.m. or so, while my friend and his family was getting ready for bed, I went outside to get some fresh air. Our camper was almost completely next to the beach, so I went down to the shore to dip my feet and get some much-needed quiet time by myself. On the way there, I passed by a beach shack, a detail that will be important later. As I stood there, letting the waves lap over my feet, I noticed the silhouette of a man further down the beach, but it was a public space for campers, so I didn't think much of it. After being absorbed by splashing in the water with my feet and enjoying the moonlight, I decided to make my way back. Of course it was very dark given the late hour, but I don't scare easily. Now, as a woman in the modern world, I usually do stay on my guard after dark, but the thought never occurred to me since I felt I was in a safe environment so close to the campsite. Anyways, as I was walking back, I noticed that the silhouette of the man further down the beach was gone, but even more worrying was the fact that as I was nearing the beach shack, I saw that someone seemed to be trying to hide from my view behind it. Immediately I was on alert and called a friend I knew would be awake. I gave the shack a wide berth while talking loudly to my friend about how she was coming to meet me. After not too long, I got safely back to the campsite and hopped in bed in the caravan. I didn't tell my friend or his family because even though I was scared, there could have been many logical, non-threatening answers to what I saw. I put it out of mind and the rest of the trip went off without a hitch. About a year or so later, I was talking to my friend about the trip and suddenly remembered the creepy experience. As I told him, he slowly got pale though and told me something his brother had told him and his family over breakfast some months after the trip. That same night, after I had gotten back and gone to bed, his brother had gotten up late at night to get some water. But when he passed the window right by his bed, he saw a man standing right there outside looking in the window. As soon as he was seen, the man left, but it definitely creeped out the brother a lot, but just like me, he seemed to put it out of his mind. Now, with both of those stories, it doesn't seem far-fetched that the man hiding by the beach shack had followed me back. I really am scared to think about what would have happened if I had been alone. The fourth story. You made the right choice. So this happened a couple days ago. I live in the suburbs of Northern California with my parents in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. My parents are away for their anniversary, so I've had the place to myself for the week. So I got home from a late shift at work around 1 a.m. I go inside, shower, then I head to the kitchen to make some buffalo wings for dinner. I crack open a beer and sit in front of the TV. I was sifting through movies to watch on HBO, and when all of a sudden the doorbell rings. It actually startled me to the point that I actually jumped off the couch, knocking my beer over in the process. It's now 2 a.m., and there was no good reason for anyone to be at the door at this hour. I just stared in the direction of the front door for several seconds before it rang again, followed by rapid knocking on the door and window. Now for whatever reason I was no longer scared but more annoyed at the fact that some idiot would think it's an appropriate time to be banging on someone's front door. I head over to the front door, unlock the deadbolt, and pull the front door open, leaving the chain in place. In the heat of the moment I did not think to look out the window first, I just yanked the door open. Standing on my front porch was a woman, around mid-20s, with long silky black hair, and a purple hoodie with black pants. I said, "Can I help you?" To which she responded with, "Yes, sorry to bother you so late, but my boyfriend and I are having some car trouble and our phones are dead. We were wondering if you could possibly let us use yours." She pointed up the street to a dark-colored sedan parked underneath the street lamp and said, "See, that's us right there." Now had this been any other person and I'd have said no, but she looked innocent, like she was a college student. I live in a college town, and it wasn't uncommon for college kids to be out late on a Friday night. I asked her where her boyfriend was and she said he walked to the gas station to see if anyone had a phone there. I pulled my iPhone out and told her to make it quick as I was about to go to bed. She thanked me and said she'd only take 2 seconds. She took my phone and dialed a number and put the phone up to her ear. After a couple rings, whoever she called picked up and she said, "Yeah, it's me, I'm borrowing someone's phone." She stopped talking and I could barely make out a man's voice on the other end. Now at this point I started to feel uneasy. She was taking a lot longer to be done with the phone call and I started to get impatient. The whole time she just stood there staring at me with a wide-eyed expression and a creepy smile that looked forced while this person on the other end kept talking. She finally said, "Okay, bye," and handed me my phone back. She then said, "Do you think I might be able to come inside to use your bathroom?" I said no and wished her good luck before shutting the front door. Right as I was about to walk away, I heard her laugh and say, "You made the right choice." I looked out the peephole and she was still standing on my porch, but now she had a man standing next to her. He looked to be around her age and was wearing a hoodie and face mask. The pair then started to circle around my house, banging on windows and laughing. I didn't hesitate to call 911 at this point. They stuck around for several minutes trying to get in through my back door. I had my Glock 19 in hand, aimed at the back door with 911 on speaker, and was prepared to do whatever I had to do if they got in. They banged on my back door for around 5 minutes before they finally left. I watched them run up the street to that same black sedan I mentioned earlier and take off up the street. Cops showed up a few minutes later and took a report. They told me that I was the third person to call them that night reporting a suspicious couple attempting to enter homes. I don't know what they had planned, but I'm inclined to believe it was nothing nice. Moral of the story is never answer the front door at 2 a.m., especially without looking to see who it is first. I learned my lesson that night. The fifth story. A fox hunter's story. This is a story my aunt told me years ago. My aunt and her family lived in a very rural and backwoods area of Lincoln County, West Virginia. She said that her father would go fox hunting periodically. He and other men would travel up into the mountains to their camp. There they would let their dogs run, chase foxes, and spend the evening talking and telling stories among themselves. My aunt had many siblings, was not uncommon back in the 1950s backwoods WV. Her mother decided that she would walk with several of the younger children up to her husband's, my aunt's father, camp. My aunt was one of the party. She said that they walked a long way back up onto the mountain and spent a few hours relaxing and spending time with her dad. The group had such a nice time that they didn't realize that it had gotten late. My aunt's father gave his wife a lantern in order for her and the kids to be able to see on their long journey down the mountain. As the group left, the light from Fox Hunter's camp eventually faded out of sight. As they walked on down the mountain, her mother noticed a small ball of light about the size of a softball coming down the mountain behind them. Thinking it was her husband needing something, she and the children stopped on the trail to wait. As they stood there, the light slowly made its way down the path and into better view. My aunt said that the closer it got, they could see that it wasn't a lantern, but a ball of light floating about 3 feet from the ground. She said once her mother realized this, she put the children in front of her and told them to run as fast as they could down the old trail that was cut into the mountain. My aunt told me that they all ran as fast as they could down the hill. She said that the faster they ran, the faster the ball of light moved. My aunt said that they finally got to where their home was and ran inside and locked the door. According to my aunt, they were all terrified. When they finally got the courage to look out the window, they saw nothing. The sixth story. Sometimes I can see with my eyes closed. Sometimes I can see with my eyes closed. When I was in 8th standard, I had a problem of sleep paralysis. Whenever I went to sleep, I suffered with it. But sometimes there is something different. I mean, between the stage of waking and sleeping, in half sleep, I can see with my eyes closed. Even I can tell what color of bedsheet is on the bed of next room and what is on the bed, like how many pillows or some type of other folded bed sheet, or my backpack. It always started when my eyes were closed and suddenly I am seeing the wall of other room and I am in the other room checking around, in my half sleep. I can see the folding bed, etc., almost all of the room, but then one black figure shows up, starts running for me. Then my mom wakes me up and I tell her all the things I remember so that she can check am I telling the truth, and yes, I was. We went to priests and asked them to do ritual in our home. After the ritual I was still getting those kind of dreams. Then the priest told me to wear a locket that he made. But I was still getting those dreams, and one night it stopped. The seventh story. We were stalked by a catacomb dweller in Paris. A few summers ago, I had the opportunity to study abroad in France. To say that it was an amazing experience would be an understatement. I absolutely loved it. For this trip, myself and 10 other students from my university, including our accompanying professor, would spend the month of June in Toulouse. But before our classes started, we would spend 4 days in Paris exploring and having fun. I didn't speak a lick of French going into this trip, but by the end, I would have learned quite a lot. This was because I never missed an opportunity to talk to someone. You'd be surprised by how much you learn a language by simply trying to speak to people in that language. I met so many people and had so many unique experiences because of this. We all did. However, there are times when someone you come across might be a little too eager to make friends. There are times when you have to know where to draw the boundaries. Our last night in Paris was one of those times, and thinking back on it, we were lucky, because things could have gone so much worse. After arriving at Charles de Gaulle Airport and getting settled in our hotel, we set out to explore the city. Over the course of those 4 days, we saw Musée d'Orsay, the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower and the Champ de Mars, Versailles, and Notre Dame, from a distance, as this was right after the fire, and of course, enjoyed the amazing food the city had to offer. We had more gelato and macarons than I could count. It was a great time. However, I had also wanted to take a tour of the Paris catacombs. Unfortunately, time was a concern and I didn't want to be out in the city alone without cell service to communicate with the others. On our last day, after dinner, some of our group decided to turn in for the night, to prepare for tomorrow morning's train ride south to Toulouse. However, 6 of us, including myself, we'll call the others Natalie, Dan, Ari, Maria, and Oscar, felt the night was still young. Besides me, everyone was under 21, and since France's drinking age is 18, they wanted to make the most of it. Overall, we wanted to enjoy Paris as long as we could. Besides, we could just sleep on the train tomorrow. We headed off, hopping from bar to bar until around 10 p.m., when we found one the girls liked. It was on a small, narrow stone brick road, lined with other small restaurants and bars, their outdoor seating areas filled with people. Inside, we found ourselves a round table and got drinks. I didn't realize it at the time, but one of the girls, Natalie, had been dropping hints on me the entire trip, and through my complete obliviousness, I had inadvertently rejected her and made her upset. As callous as it sounds, I wasn't really too concerned. I was having the time of my life. While I was waiting for my beer at the bar, a tall boy who looked roughly our age came up to me. He had curly brown hair and thick stubble. "Are you American?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, chuckling. "How did you know?" "Come on, my friend," he replied in a matter-of-fact kind of tone. "The way you look, the way your friends are acting over there, it is very obvious. Everyone here can tell." I laughed, slightly embarrassed, and we started up a friendly conversation. I found out that he was a student at Paris-Sorbonne University, and worked in the MTRO during the summer. At least, that's what he said. After a few minutes, we had become friendly enough that I invited him to our table. He seemed very excited to meet everyone. Introducing himself as Hugo, he was an instant hit. Especially with all three of the girls in our group, who seemed immediately drawn to him. He was simply magnetic in the way he spoke and carried himself. His face seemed almost fixed in a warm, inviting smile, which showed off his nearly perfect teeth. Of course, the French accent certainly gave him charisma points. Natalie in particular was hooked. She almost never took her eyes off of him as soon as he sat down. After everyone introduced themselves, we began talking about our trip and what we were doing on our study abroad semester. We talked about the US and all the stereotypes associated with it, which brought laughs amongst everyone. Hugo became the life of the party, even offering to buy our whole table drinks. At one point, Dan and I even sang along when a song in English happened to be playing, which amused Hugo. Natalie was laughing the hardest at all of his jokes, even flirtatiously grabbing his arm and brushing his shoulder, though we weren't entirely sure if it was because she was tipsy or if she was actually into him. Hugo was well enough aware and bought her more drinks, mainly Moscow Mules, whenever she asked. He would just say, "Of course, Monday Joe," and pull out another euro banknote from the seemingly endless supply in his pocket. He offered us his cigarettes as well, thought it came as a surprise to him when he found out none of us were smokers. In one instance of attempting to produce another euro note from his pocket, he accidentally dropped something else out, the sound of a plastic material smacking the wooden floor of the bar. Ari was sitting next to him, and upon hearing the sound, reflexively looked to see what it was. As Hugo leaned over and reached down to retrieve the object, Ari quickly looked back up. Eventually, after hearing about our time in Paris and the places we had visited, Hugo asked us if we had been to the catacombs. I told him that while it was something we would be interested in, we simply never got around to it. "Oh, that is too bad," he said. "This is your last day too. And the last tour ended hours ago." "Yeah, it sucks," Ari said, though from her tone, she wasn't all too concerned. "Well, maybe next time. The catacombs are fantastic. I think you really should have gone." Hugo was suddenly transfixed on the topic, now that he had brought it up. "I love it. Imagine, a city of the dead, under our feet. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, much of them unknown. No way, dude, Dan had probably had a drink too many, several drinks ago." "Sounds spooky," said Maria. "Maybe you should take us next time we're here." "Why wait?" Hugo paused, his voice suddenly slowing down. "Why don't we go tonight?" "What do you mean?" Ari asked. She could handle her liquor, and now she had suddenly sharpened up. I think we all knew what Hugo was implying, though none of us were willing to say it out loud. "I mean, we visit the catacombs. I can take you there. Think of me as your personal tour guide." Hugo's smile never left his face. "Yeah, totally," Dan shouted. "How?" I asked. "They're closed. And most of the tunnels are restricted." "Monday Ami, trust me," Hugo said. "I go down there all the time. Me and my catacomb friends. We know the tunnels, we know how to get in. There are secret entrances all over the city. No one knows about them but us." By now my friends and I were looking over at each other nervously, not sure of what we should do. "That's very interesting, Hugo," Oscar said facetiously, trying to hint at him to change the conversation. But Hugo continued, "You will see it's true. Trust me. Tonight we're having a party down there. Lots of people. We have music, drinks. You want ROS? We have ROS. We have weed, ecstasy, blow, all of it." He looked down at Natalie, who was curled up under his arm. "You want to come, Monday Joe?" "I do," Natalie said, grinning. By now she was very drunk. Hugo turned to the rest of us. "See? Your friend wants to come." "Yeah, I don't think so," Ari said, her voice more stern. "Come on," Hugo said. "No, I think we're good," said Ari. "But Natalie wants to come, do not ruin the night for her," Hugo smirked. "That's just too bad," Oscar added. Because he wasn't much of a drinker, he kept his composure. "It will be fun, for whatever reason," Hugo was very persistent. "You will get to meet my friends. We will all be friends." "No, I think it's time we call it a night," I said. I really hoped Hugo would not try anything. "The night is still young." Hugo stood up, pulling Natalie onto her feet with him. He pointed to a door in the corner of the bar room. "There is a secret entrance to the tunnels in the basement of this bar. The owner knows me. He will let us in." "Hugo, we have to get up and catch the train tomorrow," said Ari, sighing. "You will have time. Just come, stay with us a few hours." Hugo smirked again. "Are you afraid the police will find out? They do not know the tunnels like we do." "We're tired, buddy," I said, trying to keep the situation from escalating. By now I was sweating. The night this time of year was already hot, and combined with the stifling atmosphere of the bar, it was unbearable. We had a great time, but we need to go. "Natalie, come on," Ari gestured to her. The two had already developed a strong friendship over the past 4 days. Natalie turned to Hugo. "I think they want me to go." She began pulling away from Hugo, but he subtly pulled her back. "Non, Monday Joe," he said to her. "Come with me. I will take you back in the morning." "She has to go." Ari's voice was stern now, almost as if she had suddenly sobered up. "She can speak for herself," said Hugo, his smile finally beginning to falter, his fide melting away. "Hugo, it was nice meeting you," Natalie said, no longer her flirtatious self. "But I have to go with them." She tried to pull away again, but Hugo maintained his grip on her arm. "Let go," Oscar's voice pierced through the noise of the bar. He glared at Hugo, darting his eyes left and right, non-verbally telling him that it wasn't a good idea to pull something like that in a crowded place like this. Hugo's smile was completely gone now. He fixed his eyes on Oscar, slowly loosening his grip. He turned to Natalie. "Looks like this is where we part." "That is too bad." "Yeah, sorry," Natalie replied timidly. "Come on, we're going back to the hotel," said Ari. "Where are you staying?" Hugo asked. Natalie began to reply, "Oh, we're at the..." "Natalie," Ari stopped her, grabbing her arm. "Don't," she yanked her away, leading her out of the bar. "Night-night, bud," Den waved at Hugo, in his stupor, oblivious to what was going on. Outside, I breathed a sigh of relief. I was still feeling the tension from inside the bar. I was shocked at just how persistent Hugo was. I apologized to the others, realizing I should not have invited him to our table, but something told me he would have approached us anyway. Regardless, we were just happy to have gotten out of that situation. At least, we thought that was the end of it. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning now, and the streets were quieter. Natalie walked with an arm over Ari's shoulder, as she was too dizzy to keep her balance. As we made our way to the nearest MTRO station entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I was looking in every direction, occasionally glancing over my shoulder. Oscar must have noticed this, as both he and I were at the rear of the group, and gestured for me to look back. I stopped and looked, and in the shadow of a building, partially lit by an amber street lamp, was a tall figure. In the silhouette, I could see the figure had a head of curly hair. It was Hugo. The others heard us stop to look, and were about to look themselves, when I frantically whispered for them to keep moving and pretend we didn't know Hugo was behind us. Ari yelled a curse to him. She tried to rush us, quickening her pace and almost causing Natalie to trip. We had to get to the MTRO, fast. We had to lose him before he found out where we were staying. Ari finally spoke. "Hey guys. I have to tell you." Back in the bar, he accidentally dropped something out of his pocket. I only got a quick look, but it was a driver's license. It was a California driver's license. The picture on it, it looked like a woman. "What? Do you think he knows you saw it?" I asked. "I don't know." "I hope not," Ari's voice wavered. "What was he doing carrying around a California driver's license?" Maria stammered. "Where did he get it?" "Let's not find out." Several blocks down, I glanced back. He was still following us. I could see him walking at a brisk pace, while still remaining calm enough as not to arouse suspicion. As he passed in and out of the pools of light from the street lamps, I saw that he was diverting his eyes. Did he know that I saw him? We made it to the MTRO, quickly making our way down the stairs, through the turnstiles, and onto the platform to wait for the train. There was still a good crowd of several dozen people at that hour, so we tried our best to weave through them to hide. Ari, Oscar, and I continued to anxiously dart our heads toward the landing of the station stairs, hoping we would not see Hugo. In just a few minutes, the train arrived, and we rushed in, not wanting to spend a single second longer on that platform. After everyone had boarded and the doors had closed, I glanced over at the window of the door leading to the second train car. My heart sank. There he was, nonchalantly leaning against a pole, one hand hanging loosely from a strap. He looked up, and for a brief second, our eyes met. "Oh shit," I quickly sat down, telling the others he was here with us. They panicked. There was nowhere for us to go. We couldn't leave, the train was already moving. Thinking quickly, Ari decided we would get off at the next stop. Our actual stop would have been the third one, but we couldn't let him know that. We had to get off as soon as possible to figure out how to lose him. Thankfully, that stop came up quickly, and as soon as the doors of the train opened, we rushed to get out, almost bumping into the people waiting to board. Briskly leaving the platform, we all could no longer resist looking over our shoulders, and when we did, sure enough, Hugo was there. He had gotten off as well, and was speed walking our way. Ditching the subtle act, he now fixed his glare on us, eyes peeled wide open. We rushed through the turnstiles, desperate to put as much distance between him and us as possible. Rounding a corner, we were relieved to finally see a police officer standing nearby. However, he wasn't just a normal officer, he was a member of the gendarmerie, more aligned with the military rather than civilian law enforcement. We called out to him, and instantly, he turned to look in our direction. However, he only paid attention to us for a split second before his eyes immediately darted to Hugo, who had nearly closed in. The gendarmerie officer broke out into a sprint, yelling, "Police! ARRT! Merde!" Hugo hissed through his teeth as he immediately turned and ran. We didn't have any time to process what had happened, because as soon as the officer had run past us, more officers, all of them gendarmerie, rushed into the MTRO. Some continued ahead to aid the first officer in pursuit of Hugo, while the rest, which were a team of gun operators clad in body armor and carrying rifles, gathered around an inlet in the wall. That first officer had been standing outside of that inlet, and now we could see it held what looked like a service entrance of some kind. The gun officers stacked up, carefully testing the handle. When they saw it was unlocked, one man slowly cracked the door open, checked inside with his rifle at high ready, and made his way in. The others followed suit. We realized that door must have been one of the secret entrances Hugo was talking about. Not wanting to stick around, and feeling it safe to return to the platform, we took the train back to our station and returned to the hotel. The next morning as we headed off to the train at Gare d'Austerlitz, Natalie took one final look at our hotel, and let out a gasp that sounded like she had stopped breathing. There, spray painted on the front was a message reading, "I will miss you Monday, Joe." The eighth story. the girl who wasn't. When I was 16, I took an SAT prep class to improve my score and get into a good college. The class was pretty boring, but I met the most interesting girl in the class. She was thin, fairly short, with light brown hair and green eyes. She always wore a green headband, which I thought was cute. Her name was Connie. We hit it off immediately and spent most of the class whispering to each side by side at our desks. I spent about 3 weeks sitting next to her talking during the class. When the class was over, we exchanged IM handles so we could keep in touch. This was in the early 2000s. About a year passed, and we continued talking online. We got to know each other pretty well, but we lived on completely different sides of the city and it was quite a drive to visit each other, so being the young teens we never actually got together. Eventually I worked up the courage to ask her out for dinner. I set our date at a restaurant located between the both of us so we wouldn't have to drive too far. The time for our date rolled around and I headed to the restaurant to meet her. I walked in and saw her sitting in a booth with 2 older individuals at the far side of the establishment. She looked exactly like she did in the class, thin, light brown hair, green eyes, and she was wearing her signature green headband. I approached her and said hello. I gave her a hug and sat down next to her in the booth. I assumed these 2 older individuals across from us were her parents, odd I thought, but maybe they were there to chaperone. I could tell immediately something was wrong. The 2 older individuals looked very confused, surprised, almost bewildered. The look on Connie's face was also one of perplexity. Eventually she said, "Who are you?" I was shocked. I said, I'm Jason. Remember we set up a date for tonight? I assume these are your parents. It is very nice to meet you," and I reached out my hand to shake her parents' hands. They didn't return my handshake. Instead, they simply looked at their daughter and said, "Oh, did you forget to tell us this, Sarah?" "Sarah," I said. "You told me your name was Connie." She looked absolutely puzzled and said, "Sorry, you must have me confused with someone else." "Oh, my mistake," I replied. Then scratched my head and headed out of the restaurant to my car. I was embarrassed. Maybe she just didn't want to go out with me, I thought. She could have at least just said no instead of leading me on this charade. Defeated and humiliated, I decided to just head home. When I opened the door to my car, I heard a voice behind me say, "Hey Jason." I turned around. It was a tall, light blonde-haired woman with a large round face and blue eyes. Do I know you?" I said. "It's me, Connie. We had a date planned, remember?" "Where are you going?" she said. We went inside and had dinner. She was definitely Connie. She remembered all our previous conversations over the past year, but she looked nothing like the girl I met in class. When I asked her why she stopped wearing her green headband, she had no recollection of ever wearing or even owning this type of headband. I can't explain it. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.